Aye.
Item 1.5, SFP presentation.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, board members. My name is Carrie Campbell. I'm Deputy Director of Operations for the School Facilities Board. And I have provided you guys with some handouts today. We also have a presentation. So let me just explain what the handouts are. There we go. There's our presentation. One of the handouts is the presentation slide, so you can follow along if you'd like. One of the other handouts is the write-up of a January 5, 2006 board meeting agenda item for the SFB. Another is an agenda item dated January 9, 2019 with the capital plan request for Nadaburg. And the fourth handout was a letter dated September 21st, 2018 to Mr. Rick Stephen, the former superintendent from the School Facilities Board. Okay, so I think I can use this clicker, right? Let's see how it goes. There we go. Awesome. Thank you so much. It's really nice to be here. Thank you for having us. We're happy to come and explain some things, hopefully answer a lot of your questions, and maybe shed some light on some opportunities, okay? And your superintendent graciously introduced everybody. This is a list of our staff here today. And we, brought quite the entourage simply to show you guys that this is important to us. We value this opportunity to get in front of you to speak, and we wanted to show you that we support the district, so that's why we're all here. So today's discussion, I'm going to go over these points, a little bit of history on the statutes and rules, some of the questions that were provided to us before this meeting, so we have answers for your questions. We're going to review the conceptual approval that's currently on the books for your district, as well as your current capacity in the building inventory. We're going to talk about retired buildings and your options for next steps. So just to get started, there is an order of authority, and this is the hierarchy of authority. Statutes take precedence over administrative code. Administrative code is also sometimes referred to as rules or code. In our case, the minimum adequacy guidelines are in the administrative code, and then policy. So what happens generally is that policy further defines the code, which further defines the statute. So that's the order of authority of the documents that were in question. I think that was part of the questions that you guys had for us, is what's the difference between a statute and a rule or a law, that kind of a thing. And just for everybody's sake, we found the date that your district unified, which was effective July 1 of 2007. That will become an important date as we proceed through this discussion. Okay? So the first statute that applies to the scenario that the school district is in is ARS 152041D4. And this basically explains that for projects approved after December 31st, 2001, that a unified district that does not have a high school is not eligible to receive high school space per the minimum guidelines, which is ARS 152011, unless the district qualifies for geographic factors prescribed in paragraph 3. This is the rule, R76302, that speaks to geographic factors. And initially this rule, as we look back through the history of adoption of these rules, this paragraph A was the initial guideline as it was written, the rule, R76302. This was adopted in 2001. The change that happened in 2006 that amended this rule added paragraph B, which further explains geographic factors and will allow for districts unifying after June 30th of 2005 and that have 300 or more students that are being served by the district based on our projections over the course of the next 3 years. and that at least one of A or B is true.
Okay.
Yes,
I have a
please.
question on that. How do you figure your 20 miles? Is it a straight shot from our bus barn to the school, say for Wickenburg? Or is it the fact that when our bus leaves, they go around a lot
Mhm.
to pick up kids, and it's probably, 15, 20 miles from here to Wickenburg to begin with?
Mhm.
So does that include picking up all the kids? Because I know we got reports that said that we were at 19 miles for the farthest, and I know darn well our buses would go more than that, just picking up the kids.
Sure.
So
There's
where's
different
where's the
schools
20
of
mile?
thought. Some say it's as the bird flies, others say it's the most direct route on a road. You know, if buses are making circular routes, then it probably wouldn't be a bus route that we would look at.
So what do you look at?
We would look at the most direct,
So it'd be from
route.
our bus barn to the school.
yes, on the
Right.
roads, not as the bird flies.
So, yeah, is that fair though? Because actually our kids, when they pick up our kids, you know, we're rural out here and they, you know, they're gonna travel more than 20 miles.
Sure.
So I'm kind of confused and wondering why that 20-mile thing came in.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree with Ms. Dolphin. I think it's, when I see that, I interpret it as door to door, so that, you know, they shouldn't be penalized for the mileage that they use to get here. I get that you don't want to count the mileage of the buses driving all around the neighborhood.
But that's where it should be.
Yeah, it should be door to door.
Well, yeah. So I mean, how do we, you know, who interprets that rule and how do we, I guess that's my biggest question, because we should qualify for the 350. It's just, I think we had a report that we were 19 miles.
17 and 19. is what
Okay,
we have.
so the thing of it is, the kids don't come here to get on the bus and go to school, high school. The bus would pick them up, so that's gotta count as mileage.
Well, that's certainly something we can take into
I
consideration.
got a quick question. How are you doing the miles? Somebody actually driving, or are you using MapQuest or what? Because I can use four different map deals on a computer. I come up with 4 different mileages.
Well, to answer these questions, we would have to all agree on how we want to address the mileage. As we look at it now, we look at the most direct route, whether that's on a MapQuest or some other tool to figure out the most direct route, but that's what we use currently.
So you don't use from where our kids actually live to the school. You use from, say, our school, this district here, because our bus barn is right behind the school. So you would use it from our bus
No, I
barn.
don't think so. I think we use from where they live to where the school is.
Okay, because some of our kids probably live 10 miles from here. So that, and then you got another 20 miles to Wickenburg, so there's 30 miles right there. So I mean, I'm not sure
Okay.
how you're calculating the 20 miles.
Okay, well, I don't have the answer for you today, but certainly we can follow up on that with you.
I appreciate
and
that. Thank you.
Get a more direct answer for
Yeah, I
you.
think we all want to know that. I think that's our biggest issue was the fact that,
Yeah, I think we've all got a lot of questions, and we would like to save the questions for later in the presentation. Ms. Farrington is going to record the questions so that they'll be available for
Great.
everyone.
Thank you.
Sorry to derail.
So, we've already reviewed the statute, we've already reviewed the rule, now there's a policy. And our policy, capital plan policy, adopted the language from the January 6th board meeting agenda, which you have a copy of. And the language is replicated word for word. And the third bullet there, the bold section, new section made by exempt rulemaking, June of 2001, that's when paragraph A was adopted, and then the effective December 2006, that was when paragraph B was added to the rule. But our policy does not differ in any way from the rule. Okay? So now I'd like to delve into the questions that were provided to us before the meeting tonight. And these came directly from the board members, as I believe. There's a couple of references in these questions to bullets in some other document. I don't know if that was an email, maybe from the superintendent to the board members. But we didn't have access to that, so we didn't know what the reference was when you're referring to a couple bullets, but I think we addressed the question anyway. So this first bullet here has to do with the 20-mile rule not being a law, And so yes, that is correct. R76302 is a rule in administrative code. It is not in statute.
So that can be changed.
Oh, yeah.
And how do we get that changed?
Well, we'll talk about that.
Okay.
Okay? So the second question there is, can this be changed? Have we considered changing it? We have not considered changing this rule recently. There's been no need to. We've addressed all but your district as far as districts with geographic factors qualifying for new construction. Who benefits from the rule as it stands now? Currently, we do not have any districts applying now for new school space. In the past, we've awarded as many as 6 schools based on geographic factors. And the purpose of the rule in the first place was to assist districts that do not qualify under ARS 15-2041 to qualify for new high school space. And to your point, yes, statutes and rules can be changed and often are. Okay? The next set of questions have to do with being over capacity. And again, there was a reference to a bullet, so we believe you are referencing ARS 15-2041 D3, which was changed last year in the legislative session from in the current year to within the next 2 years. So now schools can qualify for new school construction within the next 2 years as opposed to being over capacity in the current fiscal year. And yes, statutes can and often are changed, as well as rules. The next set of questions have to do with converting space. And your question is the restriction against converting space in existing buildings do not have reference an SFE rule or law? What is the rationale for such a provision? We believe, again, without seeing the original document, that you're referencing converting excess K-8 space to 9-12 space pursuant to ARS 15-341G. And that statute looks like this. Basically, it says that if you want to reconfigure as a result of a reduction in square footage, or reconfigure the use of the space, then you need SFE approval prior to board action of doing that. And these are on the slides that I provided you a handout for, so you can always refer back to this if you need to. But this is a statute that we refer to often. We get school districts that want to reconfigure either a principal's office into a classroom or vice versa. That type of approval needs to go through the school facilities board. Let's go back one. So I want to address the last question there. How is our responsibility to taxpayers served by keeping us from using existing space in the most cost-efficient manner? And by the end of this presentation, we'll be presenting you with a number of options that can be explored. Okay? This question has to do with the miles again and the number of students that are being tuitioned out, and which other unified districts have over 350 students traveling more than 10 miles to reach a high school. At this time, no other district capital plans are being considered based on geographic factors. As I mentioned earlier, we've pretty much resolved all the capacity issues for districts that would qualify based on geographic factors. Your district is the last remaining district. How is the principle of equitable funding for education met by the absence of a nearby high school that could serve not only the 365 students within our boundaries, but many who live either in the county island unaffiliated with the district or inside Dexter lines? Basically, there's a number of things that contribute to the principle of equitability. I didn't list them all here, but some of them are school choice, open enrollment, tuition in and out, capital planning, bonding, and other provisions help to create equitable funding, and yet there's still opportunities for improvement. Nobody thinks that the current system is perfect by any means. There's always room for improvement. What is the basis for their projection of the date we would exceed capacity? So in front of you is your, one of the handouts is your capital plan. This was presented to the School Facilities Board on January 9th, 2019. on the first page there, those two paragraphs, you can see that we conceptually approved a K-8 school for 800 students to be approved in fiscal '26, and conceptually approved a geographic exception 912 school for 1,000 students to be approved in fiscal '26. And all of the backup documentation there explains our demographic projections. We look at home occupancies. We look at the school district's projections for average daily membership are provided to us, and we compare those to our own projections. We have an in-staff demographer. Her name is Eugene May, and that's all she does is demographic projections for us. She relies on a number of resources. Besides the home occupancy, she relies on birth rates and housing permits and a number of different sources of information. And she compiles all this data, and she's got formulas and all kinds of fancy things that are very complicated, but she has been very accurate in her projections over the course of the last 10 years in projecting the needs for new schools. So we rely heavily on her projections. And one of the pages that you have in your packet looks like this. And basically it shows you where the schools fall within the 8-year funding window for new construction. And we're projecting out to fiscal '26 for your K-8 and your high school space.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
On the bottom of this page, it says no funding is committed to conceptually approved projects. So can you explain what that actually means, conceptually approved, if no funding is committed?
Sure. A conceptually approved project is one that is a placeholder, essentially. It's used for budgeting and planning purposes for the legislature and the governor's office. There's no money associated with the award. It's just a placeholder that says we recognize that a school district has a capacity issue, and here's what we think they're going to need in the years that we project out and when they're going to need it. And that's what a conceptual award is. It also allows us and the district to start looking for land to where we may want to build that new school, and either obtaining a donation or a purchase or a state land lease, something like that. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome. So the SFB conceptually approved your 912 space for fiscal '26, and that is in our 2019 demographic report. So evidently there was a bullet, again not privy to the original document, that references a full high school program. To us, what that means is a program that includes sports and performing arts and other extracurricular activities that you find in high schools that would distinguish it from, say, a smaller specialty high school or gifted academy. That's what we mean by a full high school program. And that last question there, what do we project would be the construction cost? So for this conceptual high school award, you're looking at 134,000 square feet at $190.81 a square foot, which equates to about $25 million. And that's for an urban 912 school. Okay? And this is the construction cost index that 190.81 is based on. We go to the Joint Legislative Budget Committee every year to request an increase to these numbers to help us apply more funding to building new schools. So on 12/18 of 18, the urban, so that's where you would fall and get your construction cost index. A couple more questions. I won't go too much into these, but basically these were two questions that were asked by the previous superintendent, and I wanted to be able to share this information with the board. If you start with just a 9th grade class, the 9th grade does not require compliance with the minimum adequacy guidelines per ARS 15-2002N. And we also have our letter dated September 21st of 2018. So this letter explains, based on an assessment of the schools, both schools, actually just Nadaburg Elementary, that where we went through each of the buildings, we looked at how well or not they could be used for academic space, and how we could help the district retain high schoolers on the Nadaburg Elementary campus. That was our initial pass at this idea, and that's what's all explained in this letter. I'm not going to go into too many details on it, but it is an option for you guys, and we'll get to that later. As far as the what would the capacity needed before a request could be made, your request has already been made essentially, and you submit a new capital plan every year. So it gets renewed every year.
Can you go back to that slide again? Because this slide says 9th and 10th, 9th and 10th at each campus. But the assessment is basically only for Nadaburg.
Correct.
So it is not possible to do this at both campuses.
Oh,
Or,
I didn't say that.
okay, what is it, what are you, can you clarify please?
Sure. We're getting there. We're getting there.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is the conceptual award of your high school space, and it's based on a design capacity of 1,000 students. Square foot per student is 134. That's how we get 134,000 square feet. And approved for fiscal '26. So that's straight out of your capital plan board approval. Okay. Here's how your current capacity looks. Desert Oasis has a capacity of 857 and 421 ADM for fiscal '19. Nadaburg Elementary School has 534 capacity and 354 ADM. So if you take the total K-8 capacity of 1391 and subtract your 19 ADM, you get 615 vacant K-8 seats, essentially. Okay? And that breaks out to 436 plus or minus 1 at Desert Oasis and 180 at Nadaburg Elementary School. This is your building inventory for Desert Oasis. You've got 2 buildings that were built in '09. And here's your building inventory for the elementary school. The one building there, building 1013, is leased space, or that's at least how it's being reported right now. And you can see on this list that there's a number of retired buildings. Some were demolished. And we track that square footage here in the excluded square foot column. As opposed to these buildings down here at the bottom that were built in '04. These were the replacement buildings that were built when these buildings were retired. So during the deficiency corrections program, we retired these buildings and built you new buildings to take the place of those. So we no longer consider the square footage as generating capacity on those retired buildings. And there you go, they were retired. And during the deficiency corrections program, the SFB funded the replacement space buildings 1017 to 1021 in 2004. Okay, so here's what you've all been waiting for. Okay, so there's 4 options that we can see, and there may be more that the board and the school district may figure out on their own, but these are 4 that we recognize based on your questions and the information available to us. We've also had discussions with our Assistant Attorney General, and these are the 4 options that we're presenting to you today. The first is to bring the buildings at Nadaburg Elementary out of retirement. And that's all explained in this letter dated September 21st. Okay? What it would require is that the district fund deficiency corrections to the buildings and added fencing. So this would entail the district spending bond money to bring the buildings out of, or bring them into compliance with the minimum adequacy guidelines. Okay? The second option would be to reconfigure the excess K-8 space to 912 space at one or both schools, depending on what you choose to do. That would require a little bit more additional review by SFB Legal Counsel, just to be sure that we're on solid footing. And it would require further capacity analysis and SFB board approval. But it is doable. Okay? The third and fourth options are what we were talking about earlier, changing laws and rules In order to change a law, you have to lobby to change the statute with the legislature. The session starts in January. That could take you 4 to 5 months throughout the session if you're successful. The fourth option would be to propose a modification to the rule. Currently, we are in the rulemaking process, and we are scheduled for completion in the fall of 2020. So you can make a proposal to the committee of rulemaking and present what you would like to see changed in the minimum adequacy guidelines.
In the minimum adequacy or in the geographical
The geographic
section?
The geographic factors. You
Thank
see
you.
it in
That's
this.
still too late for us.
Are you aware of that other issue with the special legislation that protects our funding for high school students?
No, I don't know specifics. If you don't mind explaining it, that'd be great.
Well, currently, there's legislation in place that allows for our district to receive the total amount of funding that other districts charge us for our high school students.
Sure.
And that amount that they charge us includes a share of the bonds and overrides that they've passed. So as it stands, we receive the full amount of funding per student that those districts charge us, and there's no net financial impact on our district as a result of tuition and amount. But that special protection expires as of June 30th, 2020. And at that point, we would no longer, as it stands, we would no longer receive that extra funding for the bonds and overrides. Essentially, it would blow a near $1 million hole in our $8 million budget. We'd go bankrupt. We could face receivership, and the consequences are dire.
Sure.
And that's why, I think that's why the urgency of these questions comes across. Stephanie is a tremendous advocate for us, and there's a whole lot of people here tonight because we want to see this happen.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, as I understood it, I didn't know the details of the law, but as I understood it, the legislature renews that once you get approaching your expiration date on that statute. They've renewed it a couple different times.
But they
Not
refused
last
last year.
Yeah.
Oh, they refused
Yes,
last
it
year.
never came out of the house.
Okay.
They prefer us to-
we have someone in the building who can help us with that, if that's Representative Osborne, if you'd like to speak to that.
Well, hi, I'm Joanne Osborne, one
Welcome.
of your state representatives. And actually, your former superintendent did come to see us last year with the question of having it, just what you're speaking about, renewed or, because it was about to expire. So we're ahead of the game trying to solve the issue. And I went to the education chair and I said, hey, Nadaburg's got this problem and it's very unique and we need to find out what we can do to solve this problem. And so a meeting occurred between, and I apologize, I just forgot your last superintendent's name. He met with Michelle Udall, who was the chair of education. I was not part of that meeting. And I thought they got it worked out, and he had some homework to do. And from what I was told and understood was that, okay, they're going to be working on this. Well, then lo and behold, it came back and said, no, it didn't get worked out. And so now here we are today, trying to figure out what are going to be the best steps. And I'm here to support you and whatever we need to do for Nadaburg. We've got different options as it's being pointed out. And so whatever the community really decides that they want to try to work out, I'm here to listen and support and find those solutions, okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
So just to finish up, thank you for having me and listening to our presentation, and with that, we'll take your questions.
Is this report for the capital plan request, that was approved?
Yes,
So everything in this paper has been approved?
yes.
Okay, well then I'm gonna get back to my 20 miles, because it says on the second page, Nadaburg is located on Highway 60 between 40 miles northwest of Phoenix, and it is about 25 miles southeast of Wickenburg. Well, that right there takes care of our 20 miles. If this has been adopted, so the 20-mile rule is out, then am I correct? Or
I can't answer that question, I'm sorry.
is there somebody that can? I mean,
Not here today, no,
okay,
but we can certainly address it with our Assistant Attorney General and
thank you. Yeah, because 25 miles, and that's above the 20 miles.
Do you guys have a process for emergency situations and an emergency clause to the rulemaking because of a situation like this? So how I see it is that June 30th comes and goes, we can no longer fund our high school students. We go into this massive debt. State comes in, we go into receivership, state comes in. So you've got school facility board, which is a state-funded agency, right?
Yes.
That has the ability to help us. If you're not able to help us and the state takes over, now the state is cleaning up a mess that was created by state agencies. So like, that makes no sense to me. So I don't understand why this is an extraordinarily rare situation. Why is there not an extraordinary situation or to resolve this? You know, I love the numbers. I love the stats. I love it when people quantify things. What's missing here is the human element of what's going to happen to this community that turns 100 next year. Okay? I have 3 kids in this district. I do not want them to go anywhere else. This is the most amazing community, and we are fighting for our survival. It's not about numbers. It's not about bad guys, good guys, right, wrong, who dropped the ball, who didn't. Human element. Kids,
Sure.
please, I'm begging you, I implore you, help us. This is
Well,
not.
we're trying to do that. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're fine.
You know, unfortunately, we're a state agency and we have statutes and rules and laws that we have to follow as well that govern us. And so we are doing everything within our authority to help the district. And, you know, if need be, we can go and speak to legislators on your behalf as well. Try to get something through the legislature for you, if that's the chosen path. Beyond that, I don't know what else we can do.
Because that has to be the first thing, is to get that rule extended, so it doesn't sunset in 2020. I mean, that's right there in a nutshell. And that's where we need to help, obviously.
Or the mileage.
Or the mileage, yeah, the mileage, but, you know, that again, it's,
Sure. I'd like to go back to the options. You know, we put these in the order that we thought was most conducive, most feasible, but really, we think option number 2 is the better
that's just what I
of
was
the
gonna say,
4.
option number 2 looks like that would be the quickest and the easiest.
I agree. And it wouldn't take an act of the legislature or even a change in rule.
But who funds that? School facility board?
Uh,
Because that's
The-
another issue. We don't get bonds and overrides passed out here.
No, we just don't.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Well, reconfiguring the space would require a SFB board approval and some capacity analysis, but actually making the space ready for the 9-12 students would be the district's responsibility. And bringing in a freshman class and then the next year sophomores. and
Right.
That's how, you wouldn't start with 4 classes. in
Well, you
my
could,
opinion.
yeah, we could.
Right. So we think option 2 is the better of the 4, the most cost effective for everybody, most certainly the district.
So could you give us an idea of how long that review by the legal counsel would take? Is that something that could happen before June 30th?
Oh, certainly.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Within, a few months, we could take care of this issue.
Really,
With-
that quick?
Well, let me defer to Amber, our Deputy Director of Finance, because
She's in the hot seat now.
because our demographer has to have the data available to her to be able to make the projections, and unfortunately, we don't get the data right when we need it.
Yeah, that's why.
So, it depends on when the data is available, when we can do the capacity analysis and present a recommendation to our board.
So I will, hello board members, Amber Peterson. Our demographer is out on annual leave for the next few weeks, so we would not be able to start the analysis. Although the analysis that's in front of you from January 9th was mostly done by her. And back then, in January, it did show the district growing and that we would need additional K-8 space for your district in FY '26, 6 years from now. Unless, there's some drastic change. I wouldn't expect the projections to change drastically from January, so.
Is this based on current people? I mean, cause it's growing out here. You're going by Desert Oasis, I mean, they're growing like crazy.
Well,
Out here we're growing, so, I mean, could that be, what is that based on now, or is that based on 2 years ago?
it's based on whatever information she had available to her at that time. And when the district submits its capital plan each July, the district provides that information on the residential development. So that does get taken into account and reflected.
I believe that it's from, the information that you get for that plan is actually the ADM from the year before is what it's used.
Okay.
From the previous.
So that's not current, yeah.
So it's not accurate.
Right.
Well,
Cause we're,
usually in December, they will contact the district and kind of get updated ADM numbers, and then they'll use that along with their information, like she said, of, developers in the area. If we know some coming up, we let them know if they don't already know that information. So, I mean, the projections are kind of in conjunction. They work with us on those.
And to build on Karen's point, though, a lot of this does work in conjunction. As it stands, we lose some of our K-8 students today because we don't have a high school. And the demographer's projections probably don't adjust for that. If we have a high school, then our ADM goes up in the K-8 just by virtue of the fact that they can stay in the same program all the way through 12th grade.
Right. I believe that was taken into account
It
in our
is.
most recent analysis. I remember having those discussions with the former superintendent.
Okay, good.
So our demographer was aware of that issue.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions for me? Well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Kate. I think we all went
Thank
well.
you.